Ladies and gentlemen. Asterisk at 20 million people. That's not just a number, it's a movement. One single piece of advice can ripple through lives, across borders, beyond languages, and touch hearts. So what was this advice? Simple. Start now, even if it's messy. We wait for perfect moments. We wait for the right time. We wait until we feel ready, but life doesn't wait, and those who move the world. The advice that touched 20 million people wasn't a fancy formula. It was real, it was raw, and it was relatable. It told people to take the first step, no matter how scared, unsure, or unprepared they felt. From small business owners starting with a single product, to students finally speaking up for themselves, to broken hearts daring to love again, this one piece of advice broke the chains of fear and perfection. Remember, the right time is not a date. It's a decision. The advice that changed lives was not a secret, it was a spark. So today, ask yourself, will you keep waiting, or will you start living? Because your first step could be the next story that touches 20 million more. Asterisk, we often think that in order to impact millions, we must have the most profound, poetic, or groundbreaking wisdom. We imagine it has to be something that no one has ever heard before, something revolutionary. But that's not how real impact works. In truth, the advice that moves people to tears, wakes them up from their sleep, or gets them to finally take action is usually simple, direct, and emotionally honest. The reason this particular advice, start now, even if it's messy, resonated with over 20 million people is because it was grounded in reality. It spoke to a deep, shared human experience, the struggle of overthinking, the paralysis of waiting for perfection, and the fear of failure. Every person has faced a moment where they wanted to begin something, a dream, a project, a conversation, but held themselves back because the moment didn't feel perfect. When that advice came, it didn't come dressed in fancy language or motivational cliches. It was raw. It was real. It was like a mirror held up to their procrastination and perfectionism, forcing them to confront the lie that they needed to be ready first. There's something incredibly powerful about truth that feels like it's speaking directly to you. That's why it spread like wildfire from social media, clips to reels, WhatsApp forwards, community groups, classrooms, and boardrooms. People didn't just hear the advice, they felt it. And most importantly, they shared it not because they were told to, but because it touched something true inside them. This proves a profound lesson. Impact doesn't come from complexity. It comes from clarity, from relatability, from saying what others are afraid to say, or what they deeply need to hear at exactly the right moment. Simple truths, when spoken from the heart, don't just reach ears, they reach souls. And once a soul is moved, action follows. That's when transformation happens. That's how a sentence can become a movement. That's how advice becomes a revolution. One of the most dangerous myths we grow up believing is this: once it's perfect, I'll start. This idea quietly takes root in our minds, reinforced by society, schooling, and even self-help culture. We're told to be prepared, to get it right, to make sure everything is in order before we take a step forward. But what's rarely said, and what 20 million people realized through that advice, is that perfection isn't a goal, it's a trap. Perfection whispers in your ear that you're not ready. It convinces you to delay your dreams because the timing isn't right. Your skills aren't sharp enough. Your plan isn't complete. And while you wait, life moves on without you. Progress, on the other hand, is honest. It doesn't care if you're fully ready. It respects effort over excellence. It values movement over mastery. It's messy, it's clumsy, and it's often slow, but it's real. And that's why it leads to growth. Those who chase perfection often stay stuck, circling the same idea again and again, never daring to bring it into the world. But those who accept imperfection and move forward anyway, they build, they fail. They learn, they get better, they evolve, and eventually they create something that outlives hesitation. The moment you believe that something must be flawless before it's shared, be it your business, your art, your voice, or your idea, is the moment you give fear a throne in your mind. But when you say, let it be imperfect, but let it be real, you take that power back. You allow yourself the grace to grow, the permission to experiment, and the freedom to finally live your truth, not some perfect version of it. People connected with that advice, not just because it sounded inspiring, but because it gave them permission to be human. It told them that starting with shaky hands is still starting, that ugly first drafts are better than perfect ideas never written, that showing up with flaws is far braver than never showing up at all. Perfection may look impressive from afar, but progress is what builds legacies. We've all said it, I'll start when the time is right. But what we often forget is there is no perfect time. That right moment we're waiting for, it's an illusion. It doesn't exist on a calendar. It's not hiding in a season, and it's not going to announce itself with a sign from the sky. Timing is not about chance, it's about choice. The people who move forward in life, who achieve things, who break cycles, who change their lives, they aren't waiting for the stars to align. They decide. They draw a line in the sand and say, now, even if I don't feel ready. That's why the advice, start now, even if it's messy, touched so many lives. It cut through the fog of delay and indecision. It reminded people that the delay was a decision, too just a silent one. Think about it. How many dreams have died in the waiting room of someday? How many people could have written their book, started their business, healed their relationships, or changed careers but didn't, simply because they were waiting for some magical alignment that never came? The truth is, your power lies in your ability to begin, not in your ability to predict. Waiting for confidence, money, clarity, or even motivation is often just a form of fear in disguise. But when you decide to act despite all that's missing, when you say yes to now, you reclaim your control. You no longer depend on external validation. You become your own green light. And that's exactly what people felt when they heard that simple advice. It challenged the internal script that said, later is safer. It exposed the cost of delay, lost time, wasted energy, and missed opportunities. You don't need more time. You need more courage to start with what you have, because the moment you decide is the moment things begin to change. In a world filled with noise, we often underestimate the power of a single, honest voice. We think we have to be famous, influential, or followed by thousands to make a difference. But history and this advice shows us something else. Sometimes, all it takes is one sentence, spoken with truth, to create a ripple that reaches millions. The advice that touched 20 million people didn't come from a massive campaign or a billion-dollar brand. It came from a voice raw, vulnerable, and authentic that dared to say something real. It wasn't trying to impress. It wasn't trying to go viral. It was just trying to tell the truth. And that's why it spread. People aren't moved by polished perfection. They're moved by genuine emotion. When one person speaks from the soul, others feel it in theirs. That's what makes one voice powerful, not its volume, but its depth. We live in a time where everyone has a platform, yet so many are still afraid to speak. We worry about judgment, about not being good enough, about saying the wrong thing. But when someone speaks up anyway, something magical happens. Others begin to find their voice too. One brave voice creates a chain reaction, a quiet revolution, a movement. That advice, start now, even if it's messy, wasn't just advice. It was an act of courage, and courage is contagious. It reminded people that their voice matters, that they don't need approval to speak, that their truth, even if imperfect, has the power to liberate others. People saw themselves in that message. They saw their hesitation, their fears, their dreams, and suddenly they felt seen, heard, inspired. So many lives were changed not just by the content of the advice, but by the example of it, that you don't have to be a celebrity to matter. You don't need a perfect plan to be powerful. One person choosing honesty over silence can light a fire that warms a million hearts. That's how it spread, not from volume, but from authenticity, not from perfection, but from truth. And it all began with one person daring to speak. In a world filled with noise, we often underestimate the power of a single, honest voice. We think we have to be famous, influential, or followed by thousands to make a difference. But history and this advice shows us something else. Sometimes all it takes is one sentence, spoken with truth, to create a ripple that reaches millions. The advice that touched 20 million people didn't come from a massive campaign or a billion-dollar brand. It came from a voice raw, vulnerable, and authentic that dared to say something real. It wasn't trying to impress. It wasn't trying to go viral. It was just trying to tell the truth, and that's why it spread. People aren't moved by polished perfection. They're moved by genuine emotion. When one person speaks from the soul, others feel it in theirs. That's what makes one voice powerful, not its volume, but its depth. We live in a time where everyone has a platform, yet so many are still afraid to speak. We worry about judgment, about not being good enough, about saying the wrong thing. But when someone speaks up anyway, something magical happens. Others begin to find their voice too. One brave voice creates a chain reaction, a quiet revolution, a movement. That advice start now, even if it's messy, wasn't just advice. It was an act of courage, and courage is contagious. It reminded people that their voice matters, that they don't need approval to speak, that their truth, even if imperfect, has the power to liberate others. People saw themselves in that message. They saw their hesitation, their fears, their dreams, and suddenly they felt seen, heard, inspired. So many lives were changed not just by the content of the advice, but by the example of it, that you don't have to be a celebrity to matter. You don't need a perfect plan to be powerful. One person choosing honesty over silence can light a fire that warms a million hearts. That's how it spread, not from volume, but from authenticity, not from perfection, but from truth. And it all began with one person daring to speak. Fear is a master storyteller. It spins 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't try. It tells you you're not ready. It paints worst-case scenarios with vivid imagination. It paralyzes you with what-ifs, convincing you that staying still is safer than taking the risk of forward motion. But here's what the advice start now, even if it's messy, reminded 20 million people. Fear isn't defeated by thinking. It's defeated by movement. When you take the first step, no matter how uncertain, fear begins to shrink. Not because the danger disappears, but because you grow bigger than the fear. People often wait for fear to go away before they act. They think they'll be courageous once they feel secure, clear, or confident. But courage doesn't come before the action, it is born through it. That advice broke something open in people. It exposed fear for what it really is, not a stop sign, but a signal that something meaningful is waiting on the other side. And once someone dares to start, even while afraid something amazing happens, momentum builds, self-trust grows, confidence begins to rise. Why? Because fear only holds its shape in inaction. The moment you move, you see the truth. It was never as big as it seemed. When 20 million people heard that advice, many were on the edge, afraid to launch a project, confess their truth, change careers, leave a toxic place, or pursue what truly matters. But when they heard, even if it's messy, it gave them permission. Permission to show up as they are, permission to move without clarity, permission to be imperfect and still worthy of beginning. That's when fear began to loosen its grip. Fear thrives in silence, in stillness, in delay. But when you act, when you speak, write, show up, try, fear becomes background noise. You no longer live by its narrative. You become the author of your own story. One step, even the smallest one, rewrites everything. In a world where so much feels filtered, edited, rehearsed, and scripted, authenticity has become magnetic. People are no longer drawn to what's perfect, they're drawn to what's real, what's vulnerable, what's human. The advice that touched 20 million people, start now, even if it's messy, was not polished like a speech or refined like a product launch. It was raw, unpolished, but it was honest. And that honesty created something technology can't fake: connection. When people heard it, they didn't feel like they were being spoken to, they felt like they were being spoken with. They didn't feel lectured. They felt understood. That's the power of authenticity. It cuts through pretense. It bypasses the surface and speaks straight to the heart. Because deep down, we're all tired of pretending. We're tired of comparing our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reels. We want someone that makes us feel okay being who we are. That's why this simple, imperfect advice resonated with millions. It didn't pretend to have all the answers. It didn't claim to fix your life. It simply gave you space to be where you are, confused, scared, hopeful, unsure, and still worthy of movement, growth, and transformation. Authenticity is rare because it requires courage. It means saying, "This is me, not perfect, but honest." And the moment someone dares to do that, it gives others permission to drop their mask too. Suddenly, we don't feel alone in our struggles. We feel seen. That's connection, the real kind. People didn't share that advice just because it sounded good. They shared it because it felt good, like a deep breath, like a friend's voice on a hard day, like a hand on your shoulder that says, "I get it. Me too." And that kind of connection doesn't fade with time. It lingers, it grows, it spreads, because when something is real, people don't just listen, they remember, and they pass it on. We often look at viral advice, best-selling books, world-changing speeches, and we assume that's for special people. That's not me. We place inspiration on a pedestal, as if only a select few are chosen to impact others, while the rest of us watch from the sidelines. But here's the truth that shook 20 million people awake. You don't need to be extraordinary to be a spark. You just need to be honest, brave, and willing to begin. The advice, "Start now, even if it's messy," came from someone who chose to share despite doubts, someone who decided that their voice mattered, even if it wasn't perfect. That someone could have been you, and maybe it still can be. Every person has a story, a lesson, a scar that turned into strength, a mistake that became wisdom, a failure that taught resilience. These are the things the world needs more of, not more polish, but more truth. So many of us hold back, thinking our story is too small, too flawed, too unfinished. We don't realize that the exact thing we're afraid to share is what someone else desperately needs to hear. The world isn't moved by perfect people, it's moved by real ones. When 20 million people resonated with that advice, they weren't just responding to the words. They were responding to the courage behind them. It made them think, if they could speak up, maybe I can too. And that's how sparks turn into flames. One story gives birth to another. One truth sets others free. One person's step forward becomes the path others walk on. Your pain, your growth, your beginning, no matter how messy, holds value. You might not see it now. You might think it's too soon. But someone, somewhere is waiting for the version of you as you are, not as you plan to be. You don't have to be a guru, a genius, or a success story to make an impact. You just have to be willing to start.